Hello everybody and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Clayton.
And my name is James.
And for those on YouTube, James has a neck issue, so he's not being rude, he just can't look at you on the camera.
I feel like I slept doing a headstand or something last night, honestly. I don't know what's going on, but I'll survive.
I've done that before, it's very painful, but we're here, it's Tuesday, it's back-to-back People's Polls. Did one last week, it's another one today. What's on the menu for this one?
And bizarrely, we had you back. Before we do that, can I just point something out about my concern about my co-host? And those on YouTube will know about this. So Suj looks like he's drinking piss on every podcast at the moment. So he's drinking piss. Clayton looks like he's drinking shit.
What is that, mate? This is the nicest shit I've ever tasted in my life.
It's just slightly concerned about my co-host.
It's a so it's a smoothie. It's got banana in there. It's got peanut butter. It's got milk and whey protein, chocolate whey protein.
Right.
Yep.
Cool.
Do you want to taste it?
No. On the People's Poll, we had obviously three options as per usual. One option was to vote for favoured lineup, so kind of and asking ourselves if everybody's fit, are we in a position now we can look at each team and kind of know what their favoured lineups are? Some are more obvious than others. You didn't vote for that. One option was to look at a statistic, both positive and negative, on all 20 clubs so far. Clayton said he's happy that didn't win. I thought it'd be nice to try and find a positive spin on West Ham United at the moment, actually. But the winning one is over and under performance. So that what we're going to have a look at, and this is team specific rather than individual players. Just have a look at some of the data so far this season and have a look at who is over and underperforming. But first I wanted to ask, when we look at the league table, Clates, who does it feel like is overperforming?
My immediate one is Forest. Obviously, I'm semi-cheating here because I've seen the data, but like this is what I think my honest opinion would have been prior to seeing and doing the research. Forest, Liverpool, slightly, I would have said.
That's such an Arsenal view.
Well, I don't know. I think most people would say that. Like, do you think most people would say they'd be on 9 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss?
I think most of us would say we'd be surprised. I think even Liverpool fans would be surprised on the points that they're on.
Yeah.
Based on what the pre-season projection would have been first season under new manager after Jurgen Klopp. I don't know if we're that surprised on what we've watched so far, though.
No, that's it. So from what I watched, no, not surprised at all. It's more kind of what you said in terms of the context of what I was expecting in the summer. That's it, to be honest, on overperformance. I feel like City, I'd expected to be there. Arsenal, I'd say, I probably feel like they're underperformed compared to where I would have expected. But yeah, you haven't asked me on under. You asked on overs. So they were the only two for me, really, Liverpool and Forest, looking at that. What about you?
It's kind of difficult to measure. I think Liverpool, you are right. I'm just playing devil's advocate on Liverpool. Things like Forest, Fulham, Bournemouth, Bournemouth are actually 12th at the moment. Brentford, kind of being in this cluster where there's 4 points between Chelsea in 3rd and Manchester United in 13th. I mean, a perfect example would be my team, who, like, you see 10th, and it's like, is the manager under pressure? And if we'd have just beat fucking Ipswich on Sunday, we'd be 3rd.
Yeah.
And then no one's having the conversation.
Small margins at the minute.
Yeah, it's very, very close.
That's a good one, actually. You said Fulham. So, like, I know you grouped them with Brentford and Bournemouth. I think Brentford and Bournemouth are kind of where I thought they'd be. Fulham are, they're probably someone that I think would be overperforming where they are, flying at the minute in 7th.
So I guess considering that cluster between 3rd to 13th is so close, for the unders you're looking at more the teams kind of below that, and I guess West Ham and Palace are probably the two standouts from there.
Absolutely.
Wolves also is a standout, but it's well documented on the fixtures obviously being so bad. You know, some were talking about Palace really challenging for Europe. Some West Ham as well.
Yeah.
Those two are not going to do that.
Died a death quickly, yeah. Man United, they won.
But again, like, one result different and they're not 13th. It looks bad that they're 13th, but they're 4 points off 3rd. So it's so close. I was asked on Friday, like, what do you perceive Manchester United as their target to be this season? We should be qualifying for the Champions League, particularly as I keep saying 5th will likely be enough. So that group between 3rd and 13th, like, there's nothing in it to kind of flip the narrative on Tottenham. Like I said, if we'd have won, we'd be 3rd. But we've got Man City next, so the chances are we'll be 13th when we sit here in 2 weeks' time. That's
there's going to be lots of swings in the next few weeks, I think.
Absolutely. And that cluster's really, really close. Yes, there were a few in there that might surprise. I guess the way Forest have started to only lose 2 games so far, none away from home from their 5 played on the road, that's the biggest standout of, I guess, surprise. Over performances so far, Clates. Floor is yours.
Alrighty. So I'll start with the teams with a positive expected goal difference first. So expected goal difference is literally, I've used FBref for this, by the way, in terms of where I got my data. So expected goal difference is literally the expected goals minus the expected goals against. And I'll go 1 to 11 because they're the teams with a positive one. It's Liverpool 10.8, Man City 9, Spurs 8.4, Arsenal 5.1, Chelsea 4.6, Bournemouth 4.4, Fulham 4.3, Forest 3, Villa 2.9, Newcastle 1.7, and Man United slightly with a 0.6. In terms of XG overperformance, so these are the teams where they've scored more goals than their expected goals would suggest. So an example is Liverpool have put up 20.1 expected goals according to FBref, and they've scored 21 goals. I don't think that's worth a conversation when it's like that. So there's teams on here like Chelsea where they've got 19.6 expected goals, scored 21. I think the more significant ones are teams like Brighton. So let me read all of the teams that statistically are outperforming, regardless on how big the margin is. So it's Liverpool, Chelsea, like I said, there's Brentford, there's Brighton in there, there's Forest, Wolves, Leicester and Ipswich. I think the most significant ones to me immediately are Brighton and Wolves, and Leicester actually. So I mean, even significant is a bit of a stretch, but they're the ones with the biggest margins. So Brighton have put up 16.4 expected goals, and they've scored 19 goals. So that's just over 2 more goals than their expected data should say. And again, it's like real fine margins. But for me, it's when you go and look at individual games, I find it interesting with Brighton. So the first game was the 3-0 win against Everton, right? And the data from that game was interesting. They only actually had an XG of 1.4 in that one. So that immediately is one. There's then 4 games where 3 of them are against Chelsea, Spurs and Wolves, where the XG wasn't more than 2, but they scored 2, 3 and then 2 in those games. So again, it's like there's that one game in isolation against Everton and then like a sequence of 3 games where, again, it's ever so slightly overperforming, but over a cumulative period, it adds up, right? Wolves is another one. So despite their tough fixtures, they're doing well in terms of the clinical side of things, but then is that more of a concern when you're outperforming things? Because I feel like the general narrative on this is when teams are overperforming, the sentence I always hear is reversion to the mean is going to be coming. So Wolves have put up 11.5 expected goals and scored 16. They've not actually put up more than 2 expected goals in a single game, but they've scored 2 or more in 5 games.
Yeah, that's really interesting. With the fixtures they've had, it's really interesting. Obviously, they scored 2 at the weekend. That includes Matthias Cunha scoring an absolute worldie, which is obviously going to be a really low XG, for example. He's obviously really clinical and a very good forward. I don't know quite how to measure that with Wolves because the fixture has been so tough as well. There's things in there they've had like little anomalies where the game against Chelsea in matchday 2 had a really high XG for both teams just in the first half, and then they got battered in the second half, for example. So you could look at Wolves and say, right, well, they're 18th for XG so far. But then the 16 goals scored, actually, from the games played so far is pretty good.
Where does that put them? Have you got that?
In terms of goals scored, yeah. I mean, that's more than Bournemouth. It's more than Manchester United. It's the same as Fulham. It's more than Nottingham Forest in terms of goals scored. So about mid-table for goals scored, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But then the data would suggest that might come back down a little bit.
Yeah, but then you never know if in the air quotes easier fixtures they're able to put up more expected data, then you never know. As long as they kind of match that or they're thereabouts, should be all right.
The thing is with data, you're always going to get the anomalies, right? How many times we spoke about, say, Brighton under like Graham Potter, for example, you just knew they were going to be under expected XG, right? There's players, Jamie Vardy, your Heung-min Sons, historically have outperformed individually because they're great finishers. Jamie Vardy, very clinical, for example.
Well, that's a nice segue. Anomalies, Jamie Vardy. Leicester, 11.1 expected goals, 14 goals scored. And you talk about anomalies. For me, it's just that Arsenal game I could see when I looked at their kind of individual games and data. So they obviously scored 2 goals in that game against Arsenal. But do you know what the expected goals was for them in that game?
Oh, it was like 0.3 or
Bang
something.
On, yeah, 0.3. And obviously I remember I was there for that game, so remember the James Justin goal just being an absolute screamer. But it's one of them where, as a fan in the ground, despite being against my team, I was like, fair play. Like, I think this is the thing in football now. I feel like with the influence of statistics, we're just very quick to reduce a goal to like, oh no, that's statistically that's not going to happen. Whereas like they're professional footballers, they've got the technique to do it. So yeah, in terms of anomalies, that's the only real game I could find in Leicester's. But yeah, Brighton, Wolves, and Leicester were the kind of significant overperformance in terms of goals versus expected goals. Do you want to talk about the unders before I look at expected goals against?
I'm just going to say about Brentford.
Yeah, so they've got
XG 18.2, scored 22.
Scored 22, yeah. In hindsight, I don't really know why I didn't hone in on them.
I mean, they're a standout at the moment. Those who watch the Monday Night Football, actually, that's been the anomaly in their games this season in terms of how they've played. Saturday was more of a reversion to what they've been, which is very good offensively and very bad defensively. They've scored 22 and conceded 22 in 11 games. So they are averaging 2-2 in every game. It's quite remarkable. So, I mean, if you do that over the course of the season, you're going to score 76 and concede 76.
You've spoken a lot about, especially when we're doing previews, like just expect goals in Brentford games and stuff. What do you think they're doing differently that is enabling them to kind of consistently have those type of games and, as a result, potentially outperform the expected data that they put up?
Yeah, I think in terms of individuals, Visser and Bumo are obviously good goal scorers. They've obviously got many different avenues to scoring goals. I mean, it's another one from a long throw, for example, at the weekend. Not many other teams have got that kind of in their armoury. So a throw-in on the touchline is a bigger chance for Brentford than it is for the majority of other teams. What's the XG at the point of the throw-in? I don't know if anyone's ever measured that yet.
I don't think you can.
I would guess it's 0.0 from the point of the throw-in generally.
Yeah.
If you take a long throw into the box, what's your XA on that? I don't know the answer.
I reckon it's all right, you know.
I have no idea.
Depends on Rory Delap.
Depends who's taking the throw-in, maybe. Do you know what? If someone knows the data on Rory Delap and his throw-ins and what his XA was from 2007 or whenever he was taking these throw-ins for Stoke, do let me know.
I do reckon the expected assists of throw-ins are like, they're probably going to be less than 0.1, but they'll be more than just blank 0 because someone can just score a header from a throw-in, right? Despite it being probability very low, it's not going to be 0.
I get it. Cole Walker could throw the ball to Kevin De Bruyne and he just twats it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have XAs from throw-ins?
I think so.
Probably. It's got to be so low though, isn't it? Anyway, the point being is Brentford have very different avenues to attack in. Good short, intricate play, but also very happy to go direct and play off second balls. We've seen that a lot with the early goals they've scored so far this season. Defensively, they're so open. They're so open. You know what it is as well? They press. When they get it right, they're pretty good at it. But I don't think Thomas Frank I thinks that they're brilliant pressing. I'm not convinced.
Do you think
I think once you beat it, you can hurt them.
Has he said anything this season that's given you that opinion, or do you think he, based on previous seasons?
No, he was on Monday Night Football last season, and he spoke a lot about how Brentford press, and I like a lot of their structure. But I do think if you beat it, they're open. And I think individually at the back, the quality is just not there at the moment. I think Tom Med, as well as telling everyone not to buy Johan Visser, would tell you that individually at the back, they're probably not quite right at the back at the moment. They're obviously missing Rico Henry, Aaron Hickey as well. Their two long-term players would walk in that team if they were available. Vandenberg hasn't quite settled yet. He's playing kind of out of position at fullback. The goalkeeper palms everything. So they're quite open. They are overperforming at the moment in terms of XG. Certainly.
There's an interesting trend just looking at my notes there. So I've obviously taken the overperformance, you've taken the unders, and just looking at my list. So there's two teams there that are matching their expected goals versus the goals scored, and they're Man City and Arsenal. 22 for Man City and 17 for Arsenal. But just looking at the list of teams I've got on overperformance, and I'm just going to include City and Arsenal in that list for expected goals. Man City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Brentford, Arsenal, like they're Brighton as well. There's some of the teams that you'd expect to A, finish in the top 4 and then B, possibly top 8. And I think historically, like I haven't actually looked at this to see if data backs this up. I do feel like the best teams typically do outperform their expected goals just by sheer volume of chances. It creates enough opportunities to convert that probability, I guess. I don't know if you'd agree with it.
I mean, take that Arsenal-Leicester game where you won 4-2, and we obviously said Leicester well outperformed their XG. I think that was an anomaly where your XG was really high. It was like 3.5 or something. I think
it was
from
over
the game.
4 because
Was it over?
I think that was one of our records.
But most commonly, if a team scores 4, they're going to outperform their XG.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and the top teams will do that sort of thing more often, right? And maybe put a 6 or a 7 on the board. If someone wins 7-0, it's so unlikely their XG is going to be 7, right? It's probably kind of half that. So you've got a massive overperformance there on an individual game. I've often wondered this about, you used the Heung-min Son example, where you know that if he goes through, he's a great finisher. Yeah. Whereas you could take someone like, let's even use from the same team, Richarlison. I'm not even sure if he is someone who regularly underperforms his XG. But if the two players go through in that moment, which one do you fancy to score?
Son,
but the XG is the same. Son has a historical great record against Manchester City, just not in the moment where you wanted it, princess. The XG for the two players is the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's right. It's not criticism of models or anything, but should that ever be factored in? The best teams have the best finishers.
There will probably be someone out there that tries to create a model which is player-specific based on their history, yeah. Be interesting to see how that goes.
The one that people keep using individually at the moment is obviously Haaland, isn't it? Right, first 5 games, 10 goals from 5.5 XG or something. And 2 goals from 6.5 XG since then, or something like that, right? So it basically has leveled out. That won't always happen, right? It's someone like Haaland, whenever he has a streak, he's going to outperform his data, right? But he's such a good finisher that it's natural that he will, and you would expect that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's an interesting thing to slant. Should it be that the best teams will regularly outperform their XG? Probably is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think
we've got better finishers.
Well, that and also just the territory those teams will typically operate in. I think because they'll be camped in the final third more often, they're more likely to take shots slightly further back, like when they face low blocks and stuff. I think it's just the behaviours that would then be encouraged on the pitch, like they're more likely to take those riskier opportunities. Yep. Possibly, I don't know.
Okay, let's do some underperformers.
Hit me.
So far this season. Bournemouth, and I'm going to do this in order of the actual XG that they've posted so far this season. So Bournemouth, from an XG of 18.8, have only scored 15. So that's a difference of nearly 4 goals, and yet we all think they're doing quite well. I was almost kind of taken aback when I double-checked again and saw they were 12th. That's obviously because defeat at the weekend. Another one, if they'd won, they'd be in extremely good position at the moment. I think Manchester United is pretty well documented. 12 goals scored from an XG of 17.4, and that gap has narrowed over the weekend with the Leicester game, because their XG in the game was pretty low and obviously scored 3. So that's one for those who will say, look, it'll even out, and maybe it will for Manchester United. Fulham are a goal under expectation so far this season. 16 scored from an expected 17. Newcastle, only 13 scored this season from an XG of 16.3. West Ham might be one that surprises people. They are 2 under their expected goals so far, 13 scored from 15.1. Crystal Palace is a huge underperformance, 8 goals scored from an XG of 13.8 so far this season.
Is that the largest, or is that similar to Man United?
That's the biggest difference. I mean, Palace, that's nearly 6, isn't it? I think it possibly was Manchester United before the weekend. Sure. It's now Palace. Everton, 11.9 XG, only 10 scored. Southampton is also a big underperformance, 7 scored from 11.7 XG. But when you look at 4 of those teams they're obviously right near the bottom of the table, and it's worth saying the other 4 aren't right at the top of the table. So does it add to the argument a bit more again?
Possibly, yeah. Well, there are a few teams there that, I mean, they're not in the top half, are they?
I mean, if you think of some of them teams, Bournemouth lost their number 9 in the summer in Dominic Solanke. Manchester United, Rasmus Højlund hasn't had a great season so far. Fulham, obviously, Raul Jimenez has, but before that, Rodrigo Muniz, I think, was struggling a little bit in terms of conversion anyway. Newcastle have missed Isak in periods this season. West Ham have issues well documented going forward. Palace have had Mateta in and out of the team. Now Eze,
struggling.
and Nketiah fitting in. Everton, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, don't need to say anything more about that. And to be honest, the biggest surprise on Southampton was that their XG was that high, actually, because they never fucking shoot.
Yeah, it's always possession with nothing really converting is what it feels like. But yeah, if they're putting up numbers, then fair play.
So perhaps aren't too many surprises. I think Fulham felt like the biggest surprise. It's only 1 goal difference, but that felt like a surprise. The Bournemouth one I understand a little bit more because they've lost Solanke, so you're asking other people to make up the difference.
Some of their fixtures have been tough, to be fair, as well.
Yes, Bournemouth have had difficult fixtures, that's true. In terms of XG against, not so many big differences here. Arsenal's pretty much level. I added it in because it's fractional. Conceded 12 from an expected goals against of 11.9. Similar with Fulham, 0.3 more than expected. Aston Villa is a substantial difference. 17 goals conceded from an expected goals against of 13.3. I wonder if there's anything in that in the high line. But then you've also got things like the Tottenham game, where that's a perfect example. Tottenham's XG in that second half wasn't 4, right? Bournemouth also expected goals against 14.4, conceded 15. Everton are a goal over. West Ham 0.6 over. Brentford, perhaps unsurprisingly, because of the amount of goals in their game, XG against expected to be 19.3, conceded 22. Leicester have conceded a goal more than expected. And check Wolves, 27 goals conceded from expected goals against of 19.8 is a difference of 7. Now, to come back to some of the points we've been making, what Wolves had, tough fixtures, played against some of the best teams, clinical.
Yep.
So Wolves' XGA is massively over the expectation. Obviously, you're saying they were big over on the XG as well.
Yep.
So Wolves and Brentford games are having more goals than what the expectation is. But I always think as well, with Brentford, as an example, again, they're at a run rate of 76 goals to be scored and 76 goals against. Like, that's not what it's going to be.
No.
So it is going to drop. And Brentford, as well documented, once they hit game week 14, got tougher fixtures. Wolves now, interestingly, for those on Ray and 8 Norrie, now the fixtures are getting better. You've seen a clean sheet at the weekend. Does it now level out where Wolves are going to stop conceding goals? Because on the fixtures Wolves had prior to this weekend, you would have expected them to concede goals in all the game. I'd be surprised if there was any game that people went into and went, I really fancy Wolves for a clean sheet here. Because even some of the easier games they had on paper, away from home, Forest doing great, Brighton doing great, Brentford doing great. Those were like the easiest games they had prior to Southampton.
On the whole terminology of like variance and reversion to the mean and things leveling out, what do you think happens in football that causes those kind of mad variance spells and then things to level out? Do you think it is just a game of such randomness in periods?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with things like XG and expected goals against is they're great markers, but you're never going to be exact.
Yeah, that's it.
How rare is it? It's like people go, oh, that's like beautiful symmetry when you see one team has like an XG of like 2.02 and the other's 1.05 and the game finishes 2-1 and you go, okay, that's how the game should have gone. But it so often doesn't work like that. Yeah. Like there's always a danger, I think, when you use data just from one game.
Oh, big time.
And this is worth reminding, 11 games, small sample.
Tiny,
Within that, you've got half the teams have played one extra home game than the others, for example, and things like that. Which is why also, though, expected can be used to positive good, I think, as well. So I think in terms of the expected against underperformance, Villa, we could maybe expect to do a bit better in forthcoming weeks. Wolves and Brentford possibly as well. But I wouldn't be investing in any of them teams brand new at this moment from a defensive perspective. I guess might be a few on wildcard looking at, say, a Luca Dean. Vandenberg, I've said overlook now.
Yeah,
it's worth saying. I think Nathan Collins got the highest XG of all defenders. I think.
Okay.
So again, that set piece threat, that variance from Brentford. Ray and 8 Norrie, I'd have wanted him for Southampton, not for Fulham away personally. But I understand particularly wildcarders might want to go there for a longer term period. I also want to look at something that Understat do, which is quite interesting, Clay. So, and I know you'd said some of the experts use fbref more than Understat.
I never said experts. That's as we've done a whole podcast on that. That's a controversial.
I was lining you up to fail there, Clay.
I speak to quite a lot of people in the kind of analytics world, and they said, to be fair, this was last season when I spoke to them, so I don't know if models have updated, but historically it was always that fbref had the kind of best data, and Understat had different models from different data sources. I don't know if things have changed now, but historically, since then, I've just always used fbref.
This might give us a little bit of understanding of some of the stuff that might happen next in a more generic fashion. So they have an expected points model, as in points per game. And the majority of the top teams are outperforming their expectation at the moment. So all of the top 6, you have to go down to, top 7. You have to go down to, no, I'm telling a lie, it is top 6. You have to go down to Fulham, I think, in 7th. To find a team that is underperforming their expected points so far this season.
Are Arsenal in that then? So you said top 6?
Overperformance.
Yeah.
So it's very close. So Arsenal are on, 18 points, I think? Is that right?
I think so.
Or is it? No, 19, aren't you?
Oh, 19. Yeah.
You're on 19 points. Arsenal's expected points on their model is 17.88.
The reason I ask is I think Arsenal have been quite an interesting case study if people were looking from a data lens, because we speak about sample sizes, and I think 2 games were with 10 men, and then you kind of look at the fixtures and stuff. That's one where I don't really know what best practice is in terms of how you interpret data and kind of scale that out to kind of build a hypothesis and stuff. But yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, so this is of all the things I looked at, this was the most interesting one of all. And it is worth saying, after the Wolves game, they come into a really difficult run of fixtures. But on expected points so far, Fulham are 2nd.
Whoa, fair play. I did see a graphic. There's a really good account I'd recommend people check out. It's called Mark R Statsbot on X. And
I know it, yeah.
Have you seen the graphic where it's like,
yeah.
It's a X and Y chart, and it's got expected goals, expected against, and it's just a really nice visual where you can plot teams, and there's Liverpool there, there's Arsenal in the top right quadrant, and then Fulham are there as well, and they're kind of the best of the rest. So fair play. That adds up with that table you've got there.
Yeah, they have got some difficult fixtures coming up, as said. But yeah, for Fulham to actually be on expected points, 2nd.
Flying.
Yeah, really good. So expected points so far is 21.54. It won't surprise you that Liverpool are top of that table. 24.05 points, have taken 28. So you could say, yeah, they're on a massive overperformance, but yeah, so even Manchester City, 23 points from the expected points so far of 20.
Okay.
Yours is a little bit more understandable, and you always need these caveats. We know Arsenal have had all these difficult away games, for example. Other teams that are really underperforming in terms of points so far, might not surprise you based on the XA. Villa are a little bit under, but it's very, very close in terms of their points and their expected. You can guess that my team is underperforming, 16 points from an expected points of 18.51. I think that would have us about 4th or 5th on expected points. My 9th with Tottenham, as I said to you pre-recording, 2nd for XG and 5th for expected goals against. Yeah, okay. But then things like that, when you put them together, does suggest...
It's encouraging.
That, yeah, it might be, and it might, because we're very Spursy, might be on the right track. In terms of others underperforming at Bournemouth, 15 points taken from an expected 18.5. Manchester United are 2 points behind the expected points so far. West Ham are just kind of 0.7 behind. Everton, 1.5 behind expectation. And then the bottom 3 are all pretty far behind. So Palace, 7 points taken from an expected points of 12.51. Wolves, 6 points taken from an expected 9.3. Southampton, 4 points taken from an expected 9.35.
That's kind of what you'd expect, right? I feel like the bottom 3, they're typically the worst teams, but they're typically the ones that fall on the wrong side of variance as well, right?
Bottom 7, and I think the way the league is split so far with that top 13 and then the bottom 7, the only 2 of the bottom 7 that have overperformed on expected points so far are Leicester and Ipswich.
See, I read into that, and I'd be concerned as fans of those clubs. If it's still in the bottom 7, but you've overperformed the kind of expected data, that to me doesn't read very encouraging.
Yeah, but you have to factor in with those clubs there's an adjustment.
Of course.
So for Leicester, a completely different style with a completely different manager. And obviously the same for Ipswich in terms of obviously not changing manager, but the adaptation towards the Premier League. And Ipswich, I think, have had pretty difficult fixtures as well. Like Ipswich have got a decent run now that began in their last game, going up to Christmas now as well, where they'll fancy they can pick up some points. So I think with that, there's you have to be cautious with promoted teams because they might adjust and have adjusted and they might potentially go on a good run and improve on that. But yeah, there's a case to say for all the others. So like you look at Palace, West Ham, Wolves, like it could get better for all of them. For example, bearing in mind their experience in the league, West Ham have also had a change of manager. Then Liverpool have had a change of manager and obviously doing extraordinarily well at the moment. I think standouts there is Fulham.
Yeah, big time. I mean, you say their fixture run turns. Like I can't remember what their run's like, but how bad is it?
So after Wolves, it definitely gets a little bit dicey for them. And I don't know why I'm looking on FBref because that ain't going to give me fixtures anytime soon, is it? Yes, it is actually. So it's then Tottenham away. Shit, what's wrong with me? Honestly, I've just set myself up for a fall.
I promise I didn't do that on purpose.
Yeah, it's good Tottenham players for game week 13. Another good home game. Oh yeah, playing the team.
So they got Wolves at home before that.
Second highest expected points. Yeah, after the Wolves game. But no, in seriousness, after Wolves, it's Tottenham away, Brighton at home, Arsenal at home, Liverpool away, then Southampton, but then Chelsea away on Boxing Day.
That is a tough string. If they come out of that, like maybe not 2 points per game, but I don't know, what would be a good target for them in that period? Depends on their objectives, I guess. But
1.5 would be amazing.
But see, I think they're capable of that. I wouldn't be surprised if they went in that run and beat a couple of the kind of big teams that you said there.
Of course they are. I mean,
would I be shocked if they turned Arsenal? I think you said this on a Patreon pod, and I agree. Like, if they beat Arsenal 1-0 at Craven Cottage, would I be shocked? No.
I mean, last year, the walloped Brighton at home. They beat you at home on New Year's Day, or it was Christmas, New Year's Eve, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Liverpool away, they were 3-2 up, lost 4-3. Chelsea away, they lost 1-0 in a very narrow game. Cole Palmer scored a penalty. So, yeah, they're a competitive side. They're one. I think Fulham and Bournemouth need throwing into this category now. I've spoken about this in terms of captaincy for players. I don't really want to captain a player against Fulham or Bournemouth.
They're not going to get a haul, are they?
Good sides. It can do, right? Liverpool beat Bournemouth 3-0 at home. But I would rather, if Salah's got Fulham at home and Palmer's got Ipswich at home. Why did I use Ipswich? I'd be going Palmer at the moment as a point.
Yeah.
I'd have been going Solanke against Ipswich, for example. Whereas Brentford are in that 13 at the moment, but I'd want to target them. And I've been clear on that kind of all season. So if Palmer's playing Brentford or Salah's playing Brentford, for me, that's a great fixture for like captaincy, as an example. Okay. Interesting. Early in the season, there's certainly few out there will feel like they're going to do mass improvement. But to finish on, it's interesting in a case example like Manchester United, who have obviously really underperformed so far this season. But I'll pose this question to you. They're changing manager. So should we use the data with them or not?
I think, like you've just described with expected data in general, as a guide, I don't think things are going to drastically change. So yeah, I think you should still use the data, but with a kind of with some caution. I think use it as a guide, use it historically as well. But this is where it's about kind of watching what Amorim does. Like, what system do they play? What effect does that have on the positions of certain players? I think this is where you kind of have to marry up existing data and what you see on the pitch.
Could we sit here in 6 months when Ruben Amorim's Manchester United have massively overperformed their data and sit here and go, Erik ten Hag was just really unlucky?
Oh, fucking hell, no chance. I know you said to end it there, just a couple that I didn't touch on the expected goals against overperformance. One is Man United there. So 16.7 expected goals against, right? But only 12 goals conceded. There wasn't any like particular anomalies that I could find. The only one was the Tottenham one. Do you know you put up 4.4 expected goals against in that game? They put up 4.4. Like, you put 4.4 expected goals up against them.
Destroyed them.
Yeah,
mate.
I know, but like, I hadn't seen the data on that until last night when I was researching this. And that
I think it was the biggest XG conceded in a home game in the Premier League. I think
really?
It was close to something like that.
Yeah, that was obviously should have been more, and it ended 3.
But that game didn't count, remember?
Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't. And then there were a couple of other ones in there. So they obviously got clean sheets against Southampton and Palace, but they did concede 1.1 and 1 expected goal. So you could say they're slightly fortunate in those games.
Every time someone keeps a clean sheet, they've overperformed, right?
Yeah, but there are some where it's like
normally everyone's going to have a shot.
Yeah,
normally
it's never going to be 0. But there are some where I always look at it as if it's less than 0.6, then yeah, like you're not really in any danger. But when you're conceding an expected data, I think if you concede an expected goal every game, you're 9 times out of 10 going to concede a goal. So that was one. And Newcastle was the other one where it was 10 goals conceded from 14.6 expected data. And again, in that there was a Southampton game, which I think we spoke about the first game of the season, right? Where we saw Southampton and we were like, oh my God, like they're going to do great this season. So the data from that game was it was 0.3 to 1.8 in expected data, and Newcastle actually won that 1-0. There was the Bournemouth game in there where it was 2.2 expected goals that they conceded. They drew 1-1. And the Arsenal game where it was only 1.1 expected goals for Arsenal, but they did get a clean sheet. Again, it's one of them where I always look at it when it's over 1, you're slightly fortunate to keep it.
Newcastle's a good example as well. And actually, the things to note from those games that you mentioned is obviously Southampton was first, Bournemouth was second. Pretty sure we had a decent XG against them in game 3 as well. So you could say even as well Newcastle trending upwards here, which probably doesn't surprise in terms of the settling down, Livramento and Hall establishing themselves. Isak's back fit now. Tonali's come back from suspension. Admittedly, he's not started the last couple, but there's different things. Joe Willock back fit as well. So it's probably trending upwards for Newcastle at the moment.
With that. And then final one is Brighton. 15 goals conceded from 18.4 expected against. And there were 3 games in there against Arsenal, Newcastle and Man City where they conceded 2.12 and 2.1 expected goals against. They conceded 1 goal against Arsenal and City and they got a clean sheet against Newcastle. So
they also had a massive XG against when they went to Chelsea, surely. Because Palmer and Jackson definitely could have got more than what they got that day. That's the 4-2 when Chelsea's when Cole Palmer scored 4, didn't he? I think Jackson only got an assist, I want to say, and I think his XG alone in the game was about 1.8 or something. I think.
I don't know how I missed that one then.
If I remember correctly, probably because Chelsea scored 4, so it didn't show up to you as a major difference.
Well, that's possibly it. So, I mean, I'm not looking at FBref on this. I'm now looking at FOTMob. But yeah, the expected goals in that game was 4.16 to Chelsea to Brighton's 1.1. So yeah, where they scored 4, that was possibly why it didn't show up.
That's not normal though. That's what I'm saying. When a team scores 4, it's not actually normal that they have an XG of 4. I mean, anybody who's posting up more than sort of 2.5 XG in a game for me is a bit of a monster.
Yeah, that's what I remember about 18 months ago, the above average boys, they were saying like any team from a fantasy perspective that consistently puts 2 expected goals up, you're like, yeah, I want some of their attack. And that's kind of how I look at it as well, to be honest.
Well, that's 76 goals over season. But then to caveat that, we say, so Brentford are on course for that. But it does feel like with the change of fixtures, it might revert to a bit of a mean. Brentford are not going to score 76 goals. I'd be staggered, mate.
Because they're going to score 80.
But they're trending that way in terms of what they've scored so far. I don't think they'll concede 76 either. But that feels more like, if you said to me Brentford are going to hit one of them, they'll score 76 or concede 76. It's definitely conceded. Definitely.
Yeah, there'll be a period where there's some like real low-scoring games in Brentford games, but I don't think there'll be many.
But I think with the change of fixtures they've got coming up, you'll see games where they lose like 2-0.
Yep.
Stuff like that, I think. Okay.
Nice.
Interesting. Good. Take it with a pinch of salt because it obviously is all quite early in the season. The data still gives me some encouragement on Tottenham, somewhat. Clayton and James show tomorrow, Clates. Might be talking about David Coote. Maybe. Quivers that lip. Anything else, Clates?
All good. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Ciao for now.
Super. Be nice to each other, everyone. Cue music, please, man child.